When Meghan Markle was announced as a guest on the Norton show, there was instant media frenzy. This would be her first major appearance on British television. Since stepping back from royal duties alongside Prince Harry, the producers expected a lively but polished interview focused on her new children's book, philanthropic ventures, and Netflix projects. Meghan arrived, dressed with poise, confident and composed, ready to reclaim her voice in a space that once scrutinized her mercilessly. The studio audience was buzzing, a blend of royal loyalists, celebrity fans, and critics alike. Initially, the tone was warm. Meghan joked about adjusting to American life again, raising 2 children in California, and collaborating with activists worldwide. But as Norton steered the conversation toward more controversial topics, especially regarding her strained ties with the British monarchy, the atmosphere shifted. Questions that began as mildly probing suddenly felt like veiled. Critiques and Meghan's responses became noticeably sharper. What was billed as a heartwarming return to the UK media spotlight quickly spiraled into an intense exchange that ended with Meghan walking off the set. It began subtly. With Graham asking Meghan whether she missed anything about life as a royal, Meghan's smile faltered just a touch before she answered, "I miss the people who supported me, not the institution." The audience gave a soft clap, but Graham pushed further, asking, "But do you think the British public felt abandoned when you left?" Meghan responded with controlled emotion. "I don't believe asking for mental health support and personal freedom is abandonment. That's survival." Graham, still calm but edging into tougher territory, mentioned the infamous Oprah interview and referenced some of the backlash from it. "Oh, do you think, in hindsight, the interview helped bridge understanding or created deeper division?" Meghan, visibly tensing, said, "That interview gave me the dignity of my own voice after years of silence. If that created discomfort, perhaps the problem wasn't in the telling, but in the truth itself." The audience gave a mix of murmurs and polite applause, sensing the rising tension. Still, Graham didn't relent. Then came the turning point. Graham, perhaps emboldened by the stir in the crowd, asked, "There's been criticism that you and Prince Harry left the UK to escape attention, but now you've signed major media deals and remain in the spotlight. Isn't there a contradiction there?" Meghan leaned forward slightly, her tone now more assertive. "There's a difference between being hunted and having agency. One is abuse, the other is storytelling." Graham replied, "But can't it be argued that stepping back from duty and then capitalizing on the royal name feels strategic?" Meghan paused, eyes narrowing ever so slightly. "With all due respect, when your life has been dissected for profit, taking ownership of your narrative isn't strategy, it's self-defense." The audience was still. Meghan's words echoed through the studio, and for a moment, even Graham looked taken aback. The conversation was no longer an interview, it was a power struggle. It's playing out in real time on national television. As the interview progressed, it became clear that Meghan was no longer interested in playing the agreeable guest. When Graham quoted a British tabloid headline that labeled her divisive, she responded, "Divisive to whom? The people who never met me but decided who I was? Or those who listened and finally felt seen?" Graham tried to ease the tone by shifting to lighter topics, but Meghan redirected the conversation again. "There's a pattern here," she said, looking out toward the audience. "A woman speaks with clarity and suddenly she's difficult. She protects her peace and now she's defiant. This isn't new, it's just familiar." The studio sat in silence as Meghan delivered her words with the weight of experience. But then, Graham made what many considered a misstep. With a chuckle, he said, "Well, Meghan, it does sound like you came with a few sharp notes for the press." "Us." Meghan didn't laugh. She calmly removed her mic and said, "If this space can't handle truth without turning it into a spectacle, then perhaps I've said enough." There was confusion in the studio as Meghan stood up, composed but clearly done. Producers rushed in, whispering and signaling to the control room. Graham attempted to lighten the moment with a half-joke. "I guess that's what happens when you invite royalty with receipts." But the remark fell flat. "Okay." Meghan turned to him and said, "This isn't theater, It's my life. And I'm not here to audition for approval." With that, she nodded to the audience, thanked them sincerely, and exited stage left, leaving behind a stunned host and a studio that had no idea how to proceed. The remaining guests on the couch looked visibly uncomfortable. The cameras cut to an abrupt commercial, and for the first time in a long while, the Graham Norton show felt entirely off its axis. By the time the taping resumed, there was a quietness in the room that even Graham couldn't joke his way through. The damage in every sense had already been done. Social media erupted within minutes. Clips of the clash were uploaded and shared, with hashtags like #MeghanWalksOff, #GrahamVS Meghan, and #RoyalShowdown. Debates flooded Twitter and Instagram. Supporters of Meghan praised her composure, calling it a dignified exit in the face of passive-aggressive provocation. Critics accused her of being overly sensitive and incapable of accepting critique. News outlets from the BBC to CNN carried the story within hours. Morning shows ran polls and panels asking whether Graham Norton had crossed a line, or if Meghan had once again proved herself to be media-verse. The Daily Mail went full throttle with headlines like "Meghan can't take the heat," while others like The Guardian offered a more measured take, a tense conversation reflecting a nation's cultural signum. In the days following, opinion pieces and essays poured in, each trying to decode the implications of what had just happened live on one of the UK's most beloved talk shows, *. Meanwhile, Meghan's team released a short, dignified statement. The Duchess of Sussex remains committed to advocating for truth, respect, and women's voices. While the recent conversation did not reflect the tone she anticipated, she stands by her convictions. Graham Norton's production company, for its part, issued a more formal reply. "We regret the segment did not meet expectations and appreciate Ms. Markle's appearance." But the buzz didn't slow down. Prominent figures entered the fray. Viola Davis tweeted, "Powerful women walking away from disrespect is the energy we need," as Morgan called it, yet another Markle meltdown. Even Oprah Winfrey posted a cryptic Instagram story with the quote, "You can't be who people want and still be who you are." For Meghan, the moment was never about Graham. It was about the principle. She didn't flinch, didn't shout, didn't play to the crowd. She simply left. And that simple act roared louder than any argument could. Interestingly. The moment began sparking deeper discussions about public discourse and the limits of so-called polite media. Critics of Graham argued that the interview was a thinly veiled ambush, polished and rehearsed, but still driven by an underlying need to tame Meghan's narrative. Supporters of Graham claimed that tough questions are part of journalism, and Meghan should have expected scrutiny. But the core question, when does accountability cross into provocation, remained open. Media professors, cultural critics, and political commentators all chimed in. Some pointing out that Meghan's reaction was indicative of a generation no longer willing to perform passivity. Others noted that her presence still clearly threatened deeply entrenched notions of tradition and hierarchy. Either way, the episode signaled that the world of daytime talk-long, a space for controlled conversation, was no longer immune from real, raw, cultural clashes. Days later, Meghan appeared at a leadership conference in Amsterdam, where she spoke about emotional boundaries in public life. Without naming names, she alluded to the Graham Norton incident, saying, "Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is simply leave the room." The audience responded with a standing ovation. That line went viral again. Publications from Time to the New York Times covered her remarks, framing them as a feminist stance in the face of subtle, systemic disrespect. At the same time, Graham returned to his show and addressed the matter briefly. "Sometimes things go a little off course. I have nothing but respect for Meghan, and we wish her all the best." It was a soft conclusion to a fiery event, but it marked an unspoken truce. Still, the tension lingered. What had started as a promotional tour transformed into a cultural moment, a reckoning, a realignment, and for some, a revelation. Meghan Markle being kicked off, for more precisely, walking off. The Graham Norton show will be remembered not just as a media flashpoint, but as a symbolic act of self-preservation. In a world that often demands women, especially women of color, to be endlessly graceful under fire. Meghan chose self-respect over performance. She refused to soften her truths or laugh off insinuations, and instead of playing along with a narrative designed to frame her, she left the frame altogether. That decision, deliberate and dignified, left more impact than any headline could capture. And as the world continues to dissect what it all meant, one thing is certain: Meghan Markle didn't lose control of the narrative, she reclaimed it. In a space meant to contain and scrutinize, she walked out intact. And in doing so, she reminded everyone watching that real power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's simply leaving.